Welcome back. You're watching our continuing conversations here at Davos 2025, and it is now time for us to bring on a guest. And I particularly enjoy my conversations with him in Davos every year. Kenneth Rogoff, it's wonderful to have you back here on CNBC-TV18. Thank you very much for your time. I'm going to start by asking you about the headline that everyone's focused on, and that's Trump. In 2016, you said that a Trump boom was more likely. This time around, you're less optimistic. Why?
Well, I think first of all, he's inheriting a boom. And I think a lot of the policies he did in 2016, not his behavior, but the policies worked pretty well. Deregulation, and other things he did to strengthen the economy helped support it. This time, some of the tax reforms he did were very helpful, or tax cuts. But this time, a lot of the things he's promising are counterproductive. So start with the tariffs, which aren't as bad as some of the extreme views, but it's not a good idea. Then he wants to have all sorts of other expenditures, not tax Social Security, not tax tips. He wants to make everybody happy, and at the same time, he's saying, well, it'll be okay. We're going to just cut the government spending. I think he's undoing a lot of good policies he did the first time, and the things he's adding aren't so good. So, for a lot of reasons, I think I'm less optimistic that we're going to get a boom. They're saying, well, Biden grew at 2.7%. We're going to grow at 3%. We're going to Biden had 20% inflation. We're going to have 2% inflation. Everything's going to be great. But his policies are inconsistent. You can't both cut taxes, raise spending, and not have a problem. And we could go on about deregulation. When you deregulating things is good up to a point. Absolutely, Biden and the Democrats were excessive and had much too much of that. But when you deregulate the financial sector too fast, you get trouble. And so I think eventually we'll have trouble on inflation, troubles in the financial sector, and perhaps other kinds of troubles. But near term, this year, happy.
Near term this year, happy. But let's pick up on some of those troubles that you spoke of, and let's address the inflation issue. Because with the threat of tariffs, and if he goes through with them, whether it's 10, 20 or 60%, we don't know, but we probably will, maybe by the end of today or tomorrow. What will that mean as far as inflation is concerned? And the promise then to middle-class America that President Trump made, I mean, what are we talking about, and what could that potentially then mean for the Fed in terms of rate cuts?
Well, first of all, it's small potatoes on inflation longer term. When we're talking about what we just happened, we're talking about extra inflation of 1%, 1.5% one time, and not a permanent change. Of course, when there's the retaliation, that'll add another 1% or 1.5%. It's not good, but it's not the end of the world. I think the pressures on inflation come from interest rates. Inflation-adjusted interest rates are in another world from when he came as president. When he came as president, they were zero. You could do everything. It didn't seem to matter. It was wrong. And now they're not. And already markets are putting pressures on interest rates. It's not because of Trump. It was just natural forces bringing interest rates higher. But he pours fuel on the fire. So interest rates are either going to go up, or if the Fed doesn't let them go up, you'll end up getting inflation. In the near term, he says he's going to protect the independence of the Fed. We'll see how he feels when interest rates, keep going up.
So it is going to be a challenge then for Powell, given the inflation scenario that you projected, or are worried or concerned about, and what that could potentially mean as far as not now the rate cut, but the potential rate hike cycle is concerned.
Well, near term, absolutely. I think the chances of a rate hike now over the next 12 months are as high as a rate cut. It's not at all obvious that the interest rate is as high as people think. It probably never was. The real challenge is for his successor, when Trump is able to start seeding the Fed with his people. The person he's chosen, Kevin Warsh, is very good and at least as hawkish as Powell, but I think Trump's going to start to put more muscle on the Fed as time goes on. He's not going to turn his attention to it immediately.
Well, one of the other pain pockets that you spoke about was what happens to debt. On the back of the tax cuts that he's already announced that he intends to follow through on, I mean, what are we talking about in terms of the impact on debt?
Well, I think the plan is for it to go up. He says it's not, but he said that in 2016, and it went up a lot, and then it went up even more under Biden. We've lived in this long period where both the Republicans and the Democrats just thought, everything's free, you never have to pay for anything. But as I argued here last year, and actually when I talked to you the year before, and I'm pretty sure the year before that, interest rates don't stay that low forever. They always eventually go back up to a more normal level. Now, having the high debt is very painful. I don't have the exact number, but our interest bill tripled over the past couple of years. I think our interest bill is now the size of our defense spending. And if interest rates keep going up and the debt keeps going up, our interest rates will go up, even just rolling over the old debt, which was at the low rates. So that's going to be a big challenge. And, he's saying, well, no problem, we'll just keep borrowing more. But then the debt goes up. I think bond markets are going to worry much more about it this time.
Since you're talking about the bond markets, let's also talk about what's happening with the dollar. And I was talking to a banker in India, and, with the kind of dollar strength that we are seeing at this point in time, he believes that it's like a suction machine that's going to pull money away from everywhere else in the world and create a problem for emerging markets specifically. How do you see the dollar strength, and what's the outlook from here on?
I mean, a strong dollar is a problem for global trade, partly because so much trade is in dollars. I think the dollar is high, and I've spent my life working on exchange rates, and most of the time you can't predict anything. The exception is when something gets way out of line, particularly adjusting for prices and trading partners. The dollar is just really rich right now. We've seen it twice before in 1985 and 2002, and it came down. I think it'll come down. Trump, wants a weaker dollar. I think magically it's going to happen. I've written about this, even though he's not going to have caused it, but I suspect the dollar is...
What could lead to it weakening?
Well, I mean, one thing is the rest of the world's in a different interest rate cycle, and it will adjust. The U.S. raises interest rates ahead of everybody else, and now we're in a different point in the cycle. And also, there was this euphoria about the United States, and probably we'll have some reality about it coming up in the next year or two.
You think so? A reality check on the American exceptionalism?
I think absolutely there'll be a reality check on the American exceptionalism. We're doing, the United States is doing well, but the question's not, is the dollar good? Is it that good? And I feel it's very rich at the moment. We're uncompetitive in a lot of things with the dollar so high.
While he has, of course, said that he's going to raise tariffs and go after Mexico, go after Canada, and so on and so forth, what does it mean as far as global growth in itself is concerned? Because the IMF is also, while it's put out an outlook, a forecast of 3.3% for global growth, it is likely to have to factor in what eventually happens on the tariff front, and that being a risk factor for global growth.
The big risk factor, tariffs are not good. The big risk factor is the unpredictability, the instability of it. If you only had tariffs in India, if that was the only problem, your economy would be much bigger than it is now. Tariffs tend to come with a lot of baggage, a lot of other policies that go in the same direction, non-tariff barriers, as we call them, things that are obstacles to trade and investment. Price controls potentially. So I think the problem's not just the direct hit of the tariffs, but everything it sets off. And also if they're unpredictable. One day they're high, another day we have a deal. Very hard to do business in that circumstance. But I think the big threat to global growth coming from Trump, if there is one, is the unpredictability of what he's going to do next. And he has a lot of good instincts, but they're not all good instincts. And I was a chess player. You can make a lot of good moves, and you make one really bad move, and it ruins your position. And there's a danger that he will do that.
And you think that his big bet on cryptocurrency could be the undoing?
I think his big bet is to financial deregulation of cryptocurrency. And these things always end the same way. Not right away. There's a euphoria, there's a boom, and then there's a crash afterwards. If it doesn't hit the main economy, it's not such a big deal. But if it does, if it gets bigger and bigger, then I think it'd be a big problem.
Let's talk about China and what we're seeing happen in China at this point in time, responding to the slowdown by way of measures, and the expectation is that they will perhaps do more. What's your own read on what's happening there?
I have to look at the fact that they're hiding information, controlling information. They're throwing people in jail for daring to question China's growth numbers. I think historically China has smoothed their growth numbers, but they haven't systematically made them high. We don't know exactly what they are, but I think now they are. I hear the IMF predicted 4.5%. Some of the people here are saying 5 or 6%. I'm thinking 2% is their real growth rate at the moment, that it's much lower than their report. And I think what everyone's missing is a lot of the actions outside the big cities. It's in the hinterlands and the small and medium-sized cities, which in China are more than half the economy. They're doing terribly in a lot of parts of the country. So I think we're not seeing those numbers as readily. I've seen them in my work on property. It's not current, it looks backwards. So my guess is they're 2%, and that would be good for everything that's going on there.
But, you know, what we are seeing from investors at this point in time is, and it seems like China's no longer uninvestable, and that seems to be playing out through the second half of 2024, and I don't know how it'll play out in 2025. What's your take?
We'll see. I mean, I think the rule of law is a problem there, maintaining control. I think investors have to talk it up to some extent because they can't get out. So most investors aren't pulling out of China because you can't. And they're just investing in India and Singapore and Korea and other places. So I don't think we're going to see a huge flow of foreign capital, except where there's subsidies. Maybe in electric vehicles where China, if they're sharing technology. But I think it's still a very difficult situation for investors in China. It's unpredictable.
Unpredictable it is. India, what's the read on India, given where we find ourselves with growth at this point in time and the fact that it is a Modi government in power once again?
Well, I mean, I think India's been the top performer of the large economies and continues to be. And it's done better than a lot of people have predicted it would, and I think it will continue to. Oh, there's so many challenges. I mentioned the tariffs before. They need to come down. There's a problem in India with excessive concentration of power in a small number of firms. We have that all over the world. It's not unique to India, but it's maybe worse in India because you're so closed off to the outside world. It makes the internal monopoly worse. And there's still problems in the banking system in India. But, on the whole, India is still, one of the best stories for sure, and not just in chess.
Yeah, well, we'll get to chess in a second, and that has been a great story for India through 2024. But, you were talking about concentration of power, and what we are seeing at this point in time is the concentration of power in big tech, and that's playing out in the markets as well, and what we're seeing with the stock price movement there. But more importantly, in a Trump era where Elon Musk has a lot of say and a lot of influence, how do you see the big tech story playing out and its impact on policy?
I'm very concerned about it. I mean, in his first term, Trump's instinct was to block mergers, to try to use his executive power to do things the Justice Department couldn't. And I think he did it effectively in a few cases. This time, of course, because Biden was doing that, he wants to do the opposite. I think there are areas of our economy we have just not regulated enough, and starting with big tech. I thought this is an area where my neighbor in Cambridge, Massachusetts is Elizabeth Warren, and she wants to have really tight controls and regulation. It's one area where I think I would rather err on the side of what she's saying than what Musk is saying. But of course, it's not going to happen. I mean, talk about Musk buying TikTok and thinking he's controlling X and TikTok. You know, what's going on that we would be allowing that? He's a great man. I don't deny that. But I think, you know, we want to address concentration of power, which gets abused. I mean, Mark Zuckerberg now has apologized for what he did, which was an abuse of the power of Facebook, but shows we just have too much concentration.
Well, yes, and I think that is something that that we will have to see how it unfolds over the next 4 years. But, you know, coming back to some of the other risks, global risks that you foresee at this point in time, as well as the opportunities. And let's talk about the opportunity that everyone here in Davos seems to be focused on, AI, and the disruptive but also transformational impact it's likely to have. What do you believe it could do for the global economy, for global growth in the near term as we talk about productivity uplifts?
Well, the potential is simply stunning, obviously. If we're talking about 50 years from now, even 20 years from now, it's hard to imagine. I think AI is one of the factors driving up interest rates, because even though the population shrinking, AI is providing some cushion to that. At the same time, a lot of the euphoria in stock markets is really about that AI lets them use less labor. This is the stock markets win, the companies win, labor loses. There are a lot of people, maybe even people like me, you know, are going to become unemployed or less employable because we're substituted for by AI. Many, many things. And long term, it'll benefit everyone. Long term, it'll bring down prices. But I think short term, it just raises profits. I think that's what they're so euphoric about. It's not that it leads to great growth and everybody's richer. It's that labor loses and companies
are getting
win.
richer. Yeah. But, you know, the impact of jobs in the near term, and I've been hearing people talk about it's not going to be replacement, it's going to be displacement, and we're going to have to find new skills and so on and so forth. But in the near term, I mean, as we grapple
over
with
20 years,
yeah.
the trouble is the speed of transformation. Progress is good. Globalization is good. We can adjust. We're all better off for it. But when something comes really quickly, it's very painful. You know, certainly the China shock for people in the middle of the United States who lost their jobs. They're 50 years old. They never got their jobs. If you're someone who's, just say, a mid-level radiologist and not, you know, the top researcher, but a mid-level radiologist, you're going to be unemployed soon. And you're not easily going to be able to get a job, anything like what you had. And I can go on and on. I think, again, labor is losing near term. Long term, everyone wins. But it's not easy to adjust. You have to move, you have to retrain yourself, and young people can do that better. But even for them, they're scared to know what to invest in. What field do I go into that won't be wiped out by AI? So it's not all euphoric, but I can understand the mood here because basically they're making a lot of money from it, and so they're happy, and whatever the challenges are is somebody else's problem.
Yes, it is somebody else's problems, and usually the government's problem to have to deal with. But that brings me to the issue of capitalism and you know what we're going to now see it transform into or morph into under President Trump. Under President Biden, there was a lot of deregulation, and of course we've seen this government bailout over the last several decades coming in the way of what could have been seen as creative destruction. You know, under President Trump in this tenure, what do you see as the evolution of capitalism?
Well, I mean, on the whole, Trump's very good for capitalism. His instincts are free markets and deregulation and competition compared to at least the way Biden governed. He went to the progressive far left, and I don't think this was good long run for productivity, and I think Trump's general spirit is. That said, part of capitalism is you need to redistribute income, you need to worry about the people who are losing, and maybe he'll pay attention to that. I think he's more sensitive to it than previous Republicans have been, but we'll see what his policies are.
Well, you know, I don't know how many people know this, but Professor Rogoff has been a professional chess player and has been following the Indian chess team very, very closely. And it's been quite a year for Indian chess, hasn't it?
Absolutely amazing. When I was playing in my youth, which is a long time ago, there were no Asian grandmasters, much less Indian grandmasters. And now India really is the top talent producing place in the world. So yes, you have the world champion, but you also have just a lot of the top players in the world. There's one after another. And I think if you can do this in chess, as Russia did, you can do it in other things. I mean, it really shows that India has this, we all know this remarkable elite that can be great scientists, great artists, great musicians, great everything. And you just need a system that allows it to that fosters it, allows it to blossom.
So the potential of being the incubator of the world of human talent.
Well, of course. I mean, we see this, of course, with the service sector where India does very well. But this is really showing the exceptionalism, the very top people in the world. And absolutely, India is very well represented. There are a lot of brilliant people, and you can apply it in other areas. I learned about AI through chess. I was convinced. I did a debate with Peter Thiel and Gary Kasparov just over 10 years ago, where they were arguing productivity would go down, and I said, no, it's going to go up because of AI. And I think chess gives us an insight into India, that if you can do this with chess, you can look how you did it, you can do it with other things.
You can do anything.
You can do it with other things.
Yeah. Well, you know, that certainly has been one of the big stories coming out of India in 2024. But as we wrap up here, 2025, do you expect more headwinds, or do you foresee more tailwinds coming in for the global economy?
Not to dodge this, but a lot is we're going to find out a lot in the
Tonight.
next couple of weeks. The next couple of weeks, are we going to have peace in the Ukraine? Are we going to stabilize the geopolitical situation, which has been out of control? That would help a lot. I think even the threat of Trump coming in has forced a lot of things to happen. Will he follow up on that effectively, given his meteoric personality? I hope so. And, you know, generally the U.S. is doing well. Europe's doing terribly. China, I think, is weak. India is doing well. I don't see any big change to that in the coming year. So the, you know, overall forecast is middling, with some economies doing well and some economies not doing well. So more divergence across the world. So
divergence in 2025 for the global economy, and a reality check perhaps for American exceptionalism.
We'll see.
We'll see. Professor Rogoff, always a pleasure. Many thanks for joining us here in Davos. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you in India, hopefully in 2025.
Let's make it happen.
Let's make it happen. With that, it is time for us to wrap up this conversation here on Davos 2025. But we're back with plenty more. Don't go anywhere. In a moment, we return.